Hey friends, welcome back to the History of Ireland series. I'm still Keely, and last time I talked about the prehistory of Ireland, which is before there was any written history. Today I'm going to talk about the early Christian and Viking periods, which date from 400 to 1169. 1169 is when the Normans invaded. The early Christian period is the beginning of recorded history in Ireland. This period lasted from 400 AD with the beginning of literacy in the region to 800 AD. While Ireland was the most well-documented of the British cultures at this time, the documents are still extremely difficult to interpret for historians. This has left historians with a lot of questions about this time period in Ireland. The first reliable historical event that happened was that Pope Celestine I sent Palladius to Ireland as the first bishop in 431. He was the first bishop in Ireland to rule over Christians, which meant that there were already Christians in the region to rule over. Prosper of Aquitaine, who recorded this, said that it made the barbarian island Christian. However, we know that the Christianization of Ireland took much longer. This is also about the same time that St. Patrick made his way to Ireland. The earliest that Patrick arrived was 432, which was a little bit after Palladius. The understanding is that Palladius mostly worked in the south, while Patrick tended to work in the north. It's understood that Palladius did his work in the south, while Patrick did his work in the north. About 100 years later, in 558, Ireland officially became a Christian nation, with its first Christian High King of Ireland, Diarmaid Mac Surbail, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It was around this time that the monastic movement took off in Ireland, and by 700, Christianity was a big player in everyday society. However, it wasn't until the 800s that Ireland was considered fully Christian, and even then, there was still a lot of paganism in the area. From the 7th century, several Irishmen, Columbanus and Columba, were active in other areas such as Gaul, Scotland, and Anglo-Saxon England. They brought back other art from those regions, which fused with the Irish art to create insular art, which I mentioned last time. The politics of this time was the beginning of the kingdom system in Ireland. They had a high king who sat at the Hill of Tara, which is near the east coast in central Ireland. Now we're going to move on to the Vikings. The Viking period was from about 800 when they first invaded to 1169 when the Normans invaded. While Ireland was organized into kingdoms at this time, it was still pretty rural. The first recorded Viking raid was in 795 when the Vikings invaded Lambay, which is a small island off of the coast of what is present-day Dublin. These early Viking raids were really fast, and they were the hit and runs. They would just come in, grab what they wanted, and then leave and go home. The Vikings were from Scandinavia, which is present-day Norway, Sweden, and Finland. This interrupted the golden age of Christian Irish culture and led to about 200 years of intermittent warfare between the Vikings and the Irish people. These faster raids mostly happened in the 1800s when the Vikings were establishing themselves as a group in Ireland. Ireland was destabilized during this time as the North and South were rivals against each other in trying to claim the throne. The rivalry between the North and the South destabilized Ireland, which made it vulnerable to the Viking raids. In 821, the Vikings began more intense raids and began to stay longer and began also to build fortified encampments. They were moving further inland and began to have larger raiding parties at the same time. The Vikings at this time began to have an advanced leadership system in Ireland. Three of these leaders were Torgest, Olaf, and Ivar. These leaders began to form alliances with the leaders in Ireland. They only created alliances when it benefited both sides. The Vikings switched sides in these alliances a lot and were more like mercenaries. They would change alliances and get whatever deal was best for them. In 902, the descendants of Ivar were kicked out of Dublin, and then they came back in 1914 to win it back. Between 914 and 922, Waterford, Cork, Dublin, Wexford, and Limerick were all founded by the Norse people. These towns were most likely run by the Scandinavian elites. However, most of the people that lived there were in fact Irish people. Throughout all of the 900s, the Irish population tried to push out the Norse people, except for those who lived with them in these cities. In the late 970s, the king of Cashel named Brian, yes, his name was Brian, he began to defeat Norse towns, which inspired the rest of the Irish leaders to do the same. In 1002, he claimed kingship over all of Ireland. However, he didn't receive submission from all of the regional kings until 1011. In 1005, however, he had his secretary write in the Book of Kells that he was the Emperor of Ireland. He was a little crazy. In 1012, his power began to dwindle when regional kings began to rebel against him. He went to the Battle of Clontarf the next year, and while his army was victorious, he died in combat. Every High King after him had no full control over Ireland, and they faced a lot of opposition. The 11th and 12th centuries brought a lot of church reform to the region, including consecration of bishops, banning the selling of church offices, and the movement to a parish-based system. This brings us to the Norman invasion of Ireland. Things are going to come really fast from here on out, and they're going to get a lot more complicated, so hold on tight. I'll see you next time, but for now, I'm Keely. Have a great day.